buenas noches, buenas tardes, buenos días o a la hora que nos vean. Esta sí que es una transmisión especial en inglés, porque, pero miren, de hecho, lo nervioso que estoy, no es es una transmisión especial porque va a ser en inglés. Miren esto. Es la hispano-catolicidad, pero ahora en inglés. Tenemos con nosotros a don Eugene Michael Jones, quien ya está en nuestro estudio virtual. Welcome, Mr. Eugene, y nuestro amigo Daniel y nuestro amigo también Edwin, principalmente Daniel, a quien le doy un abrazo y las gracias públicamente, tanto a Daniel como a Edwin, que nos van a acompañar, principalmente a Daniel, por este desafío que implica entrevistar a un tremendo autor como don Eugene, y para no estar como mí, tú, yo, ser Jane Tarzán y evitar todo ese tema, vamos a darle el pase de inmediato a don Daniel Pem para que nos ayude en esta entrevista con el doctor Eugene Michael Jones. Solo decir que él es un autor tradicional católico y que nos interesa muchísimo su visión. Sabemos que tiene seguidores en la hispano-catolicidad y justamente el tema, el rótulo de la conversación de hoy es presente y futuro de la hispano-catolicidad. Deseo agradecer desde ya y espero que Daniel le traduzca a don Eugene Michael Jones nuestros agradecimientos porque él contestó inmediatamente, es una persona muy humilde y desde ya le doy el agradecimiento a nombre de Matices y del Instituto de Estudios Hispanoamericanos Benito Feijó. Sin más, Daniel, por favor, todo tuyo.
I only will translate Dr. Jones that from René that he is very grateful in representation of all of us in Matices that you are with us and that you have been very responsive at the moment that we asked for you. So we are really pleased to have you here. Welcome home. I will start with a short biography of Dr. Jones, and next to it we will start with the interview of the conversation, right? So Dr. Eugene Michael Jones is from South Bend, Indiana, in the USA. He is an American writer, a former professor, media commentator, and the current editor of Culture War magazine, formerly Fidelity magazine and Fidelity Press. His main ideas are about logos, Catholicism, the melting pot, and religious identity, and cultural wars based on a theological conflict in between societies and throughout nations. Remembering this Donoso Cortés idea that theology is the most extensive level at which political problems must be interpreted. About his work, the most relevant books that he has written are The Jewish Revolutionary Spirit, Libido Dominandi, and The Rise of Logos. These three books have been translated also in Spanish and is available with his personal translator, Luis Álvarez Primo from Argentina. So I don't know if you want to extend something else about this introduction, Dr. Jones.
Just that you can order the books by going to fidelitypress.org or to culturewars.com. I'm referring to the Spanish edition of the three books you mentioned. They're available now, and you can order them at fidelitypress.org or culturewars.com.
Thank you very much. So let's begin. I think that for the understanding of Michael Jones' thinking and perspective and traditional Catholic perspective, it's very important to introduce one concept that I believe it's present in all his works, even if it's not is implicit on it, and it's the concept of logos. So the first question I will say is this one: what is logos, and how is this is developed in its finest expression by Catholicism?
Well, logos is the Greek word for speech, for word. And what I realized when I was studying Greek as an undergraduate is that you need 5 pages in the Greek dictionary, 5 pages of English equivalents to use to give you some understanding of what the Greeks understood by logos. So you can't understand it simply by translating it as word. And this leads to a problem, which is basically the Gospel of St. John, which begins by saying, in the beginning was the Word. I don't know what that means. I've read it my entire life. I don't know what it means. But if you study Greek and you say in the beginning there was logos, in other words, there was an order to the universe, there was a God who created this order, there were all of these things taken all together, then suddenly it makes sense. Suddenly it makes sense. And suddenly what you realize is that the Gospel of St. John was probably the most important turning point in human history, especially those 4 first sentences of the Gospel of St. John. In the beginning there was logos. Logos was with God, and logos is God. En arche en ha logos, kai logos en prostheon, kai logos en theos. That combined basically the 2 strains of human history, the 2 important strains of human history up to that point. It combined the Hebrew scriptures, specifically Genesis, which begins with the statement, in the beginning, God created heaven and earth. That's the Hebrew strain. And what St. John did was unite that with the Greek strain of thought, which was metaphysical. And so he said, in the beginning, that's a direct reference to Genesis, there was logos. In other words, an acceptance of Greek philosophy, of the achievement of Greek philosophy, as a manifestation of God's thought in human history, combined with the Hebrew part, which is the direct revelation of God to the Hebrew people. And he put them together, and that was the beginning of Christianity.
It could be said that it's the combination of Jewish faith and Greek reason, right?
I would say Hebrew. The Hebrew faith and Greek reason. Yes, it's a combination of faith and reason. And that is the essence of the Catholic faith. It is both faith and reason combined. And there's no contradiction between faith and reason. Faith is the completion or the fulfillment of reason. Faith is in things that we can't understand from a human perspective, that God had to speak to us directly about. And if you go to one of the most significant events in the history of the world and Christianity, you came up with the doctrine of the Trinity. The Trinity is implicit in the Hebrew scriptures. It's implicit in the Christian scriptures. But you need Greek to understand it, to make it explicit. And that was it took about 300 years of debate in the Greek language, in order to come up with a formulation of what the Trinity is. It ultimately came down between this difference between 2 Greek words, homoousion, one in being, and homoiousion, just 1 letter difference, which is like, something like in being. That could not have taken place without the Greek language. The Latin fathers were involved in this debate, and they simply could not participate if they didn't know Greek. So this shows you that God has accepted natural reason. There was no revelation to the Greeks. The only revelation went to the Hebrews, but God honored the universe. Logos suffuses the universe, and God honored that by allowing the Greeks to participate in the fusion of these 2 streams in the founding of Christianity.
Okay, thank you very much. Understanding this relationship that remembers for us as Hispanics, this idea of from the philosopher Gustavo Bueno Martinez, God saves the reason. What is the relevance that the Spanish Empire and the Hispanic civilization takes on this expansion of logos of Christianity? This also implies that our world history has linked always to a religious component, with Islam in the so-called Reconquista, and then with the English and Dutch Protestants. So I don't know what you want to talk about this.
Well, the relevance of the Spanish Empire came in around 1492. The Spaniards had expelled the Moors from Spain. They expelled 1492. They expelled the Jews. They consolidated their Spanish empire, and then they could project it outwards. And so this was the age of exploration. And so they discovered the Americas. Columbus discovered the Americas, and immediately the Spaniards were over there trying to annex this to their empire, but also trying to understand it and trying to reform it. All of these things together. When I was in Buenos Aires, there's a statue of a tribute to Hispanic culture, and it's conquistadors and it's Franciscan monks. This Spanish, by the way, this statue, by the way, has been desecrated by the revolutionaries that are trying to take over Argentina, and the hands are cut off. This is, I think, a Masonic symbol of something or other, but the hands have been cut off. But what you had here was Spain arriving in the New World, and they had to arrive with a military presence, because the New World, if we're talking about Mexico, was under the boot of a ruthless group of people known as the Aztecs, who had conquered the neighboring tribes and would worshipped their god, Quetzalcoatl, by taking captives from these tribes and marching them up a pyramid and cutting their hearts out. It was a brutal culture based on human sacrifice, totally evil, and only military power could conquer it. And that's what happened. One of the greatest stories in human history is the story of Cortez and the conquest of Mexico. A man who shows up with basically 140 Spanish soldiers and takes on an empire of millions, obviously with the help of the conquered ethnic groups who did not like the Aztecs anyway. They came for gold, okay? That was part of the motivation. They took the gold, and the gold destroyed some of them. When the whole operation trying to deal with Montezuma went bad, and the Spanish conquistadors had to get out of Mexico City in a hurry. They crossed that causeway, and the Aztecs had pulled up the bridges, and the conquistadors jumped into the water, and they were loaded down with gold, and they sank right to the bottom, and body piled upon body until they walked over. And Bernardo de Diaz says that when they got to the shore, there wasn't one man wasn't wounded. And at this point, Cortez says he's going to go back and take that city, and he did. He conquered Mexico. This is part of divine providence. Of sometimes God has to use violence to bring the gospel to people, because there are some regimes that are so wicked they can only be driven out by military force, and that was the case in Mexico. At that point, you have a situation where nobody knows. The native people don't know what's going on. There's no movement one way or the other. They can't decide, and then suddenly there's a miraculous event. It's the appearance of Our Lady of Guadalupe. And at this point, there is a mass conversion on the part of the Mexicans, and they become what Vasconcelos calls the cosmic race. This is a union of the European and the Indian in a totally new type of race that has all of this optimism that you can feel with these Franciscan missions all up and down the California coast. That was destroyed. This was a regime. This was the providence of God was destroyed by wicked men. It didn't happen immediately in Mexico. It didn't happen immediately, but it happened by the 18th century, and the group that destroyed it were the Freemasons. And we're talking the crucial moment in Hispanic history at this point is the Jesuit reductions in Paraguay. The Jesuits had played an enormously important role in the colonization of the Americas. They were the French Jesuits were in Quebec. They learned the native language of the Indians. They were incredibly heroic. They would go off with the Abnaki Indians for the moose hunt, which meant that you had to wait till the snow was waist deep so that they could kill the moose. They would then roast the moose, and the Jesuit would lie on the floor. It's 20 below zero outside, and it's 100 degrees in the tent, and the Jesuit is down there with his mouth under the flap of the tent trying to get some air that doesn't have smoke in it. They concluded that one of the Jesuits, French Jesuits, wrote back to France and said, these people spend their lives in smoke and eternity in flames. And that was why they were brought to that, where they came there. The real development, though, in terms of culture came in Paraguay. The Jesuits arrived in Paraguay. You can't imagine a group of people who have never met each other, and the Jesuits go in with the kind of confidence that the gospel inspires, and they learn the language. They learn Guarani. They write a Guarani dictionary, and they write a Guarani grammar. And to this day, because of that, Guarani is one of the official languages of Paraguay. But more than that, they start to teach these people how to move out of the hunter-gatherer existence that they lived in into an agricultural culture and then a manufacturing culture. So they begin by, because in many ways, it's difficult to teach the gospel to hunter-gatherers because it has all these parables about the seed growing, and they don't plant seeds. They kill animals and they eat the animals. And so by within two generations, these people who were hunter-gatherers when the Jesuits arrived are making violins. And at that point, they created an economic system that was an alternative to the encomienda system that the Franciscans basically had adopted. In other words, it was an alternative to slavery of the Spanish sort in the Spanish Empire, and it was an alternative to the capitalism that the English were promoting throughout the world at the same time in their battle with Spain. And the Freemasonry was basically the English covert warfare that was supposed to destroy Catholic Europe, primarily Catholic France. The Masonic lodges had arrived in France, and they were undermining the Bourbon monarchy. It was psychological, cultural warfare against the Catholics. And one of the manifestations of it was basically the Marquis de Pombal and the Duc de Choiseul, a Portuguese and a Frenchman, go down to Rome, and they say you have to suppress the Jesuits. The first Pope, Benedict XIV, was a strong man. He resisted them. His successor comes in, and he caves in. And at that point, by suppressing the Jesuits, he paves the way to the French Revolution. And more importantly, from our perspective, the entire Masonic takeover of South America, including Mexico. And at that point, the culmination of this is Plutarco Calles, the taking over Mexico, the war against the Cristeros. Trotsky shows up in Mexico. He's with Frito Kahlo and Diego Rivera. It becomes a magnet for all these revolutionaries. And at this point, South America, Mexico, has never recovered. They have yet to recover from the Masonic takeover of their cultures, which basically stifled all of these Catholic initiatives, including the Jesuit Catholic alternative to capitalism.
Yes, the first country that recognized the USSR actually was Mexico.
Yes.
So you in your expositions, in your books, you continuously quote St. John, St. Augustine, or Aquinas. And I have a question related with Hispanic tradition, and it's related with this. Is there any theologians, philosophers, or writers from the Hispanic culture that you really admire or that were relevant in your own formation as a Catholic?
There were Cajetan was a Spaniard. These were the main interpreters of Aquinas after his death. But to answer your question, no. This is something that I had to discover on my own and late in life. Octavio Sequeiros is a friend from Argentina. His father had written reviews of my books. He showed up at a Rockford Institute seminar and started asking about Hispanic culture. No one knew anything about it. And he came to me and I had to say, I don't know anything about it either. My whole orientation toward European culture, maybe ethnic, I'm half German, but it was oriented toward German philosophy. It went from Aquinas. Okay, now he's not a German, but Aquinas' struggle with nominalism. Nominalism completely eclipsed Thomistic philosophy, took over Thomistic philosophy and eclipsed Thomism in the period after his death. William of Ockham went to Germany. I was in Munich, where I had dinner at the Franciscan monastery where he died of the plague in 1345. Okay? And he took over the German mind. And the main manifestation of the German mind was Luther. The main manifestation of nominalism in Germany was Martin Luther. And this has been my orientation because that's simply the way I was taught. I mean, my inclination, I ended up living in Germany. I can speak fluent German, and then when I came back to do my graduate work, that entered into my thought as well. So in terms of my personal development, no, this whole idea of the development of Hispanic thought was not part of my growing up.
Actually, it's not that different from in Hispanic nations, because German Romanticism is also very present in our academia. It's more common to know Hegel or Nietzsche or Marx than a Spanish thinker or philosopher, like Benito Jerónimo Feijó, that is the philosopher that we have studied in this place. But well, and in this case, we have thought several times about the idea in this black legend against Christianity. There is like a I don't know if it's correct to say it like that, but a three-hit punch that attacks medieval ages, like the idea of that period, like that are as dark ages, the idea of Catholicism, and the idea of the Spanish Empire. I don't know, what do you think about this three-hit punch, if I can say?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I speak English. Okay, the United States, English is the official language, and because we have the American Empire, it's become the lingua franca for the entire world. And if you speak the language, the thought patterns go with it. And so we naturally gravitate toward a kind of English understanding of history, even if we're Catholics. So I'm raised a Catholic, I'm speaking English in the United States of America, and there's this conflict. And so you unconsciously adopt concepts out of the Black legend, even though you're a Catholic. You unconsciously adopt the ideas of Whig history, because that's part of the air you breathe and the people you study. And it's only after you get exposure to other parts of the world that you start to realize that that's not the whole story. But Catholic, let's put it this way: Catholic immigrants. I'm the child of immigrants. My one grandfather came from Ireland, and my other great grandfather, came from Germany. And they come over here and they want to succeed in America. And now we have the Hispanics in the same position. When in 1992, I gave a speech in Los Angeles to largely a Mexican audience about Huntington's book called The Hispanic Challenge. The Hispanic Challenge is basically one of the WASP elite saying, how are we going to engage in the social engineering of Mexicans? Now that we have this huge migration across the Rio Grande, it's unprecedented in American history. The only precedent that we can think of is what happened to the Roman Empire and the Germanic tribes crossing the Danube. Because before all these people coming across the border from Mexico, you had to cross an ocean. My grandfathers had to cross the ocean to come here, and that means at that time it was hard to get back, and so you were stuck. But the Mexicans are like the Goths in the Roman Empire, because all they have to do is cross the river. And it's much easier to cross the river. And they are crossing the river in huge numbers. And at that point, Los Angeles was becoming more and more Mexican, to the point where there were certain areas where only Spanish was spoken. But this was a challenge to the American ability to assimilate immigrants. They had never assimilated immigrants on this basis before. And now this was the challenge, and he was familiar with social engineering. Social engineering was always used on Catholic immigrants in the United States of America. After World War I, there was the triple melting pot, the melting pot pageant, where the propaganda ministry, Committee for Public Information, would have ethnic groups climb up into a big pot in their ethnic costumes, and then the band would play the Star Spangled Banner, and they'd all walk out wearing bowler hats and suits. That was crude. But the intention never changed. The American empire has to turn people into Americans. I mean, citizens of the United States. That goal has never changed. The means to do it has changed, and it's become more and more tyrannical over this period of time. But it's the same thing. After World War II in the United States, this group of people, the WASP ruling class, the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, waged war against fellow Catholics in America. These people felt they had more in common with the English upper class than they had with their own fellow citizens in the United States, because those people they're Italians, they're Poles, all these people, they're completely alien. And so they waged war on these people. And the book I wrote about this is called The Slaughter of Cities. Urban renewal is ethnic cleansing, which is basically flooding black people in from the South, the southern states, weaponized migration to break up Catholic ethnic neighborhoods. That is happening in Europe right now. Okay, it got tried out here. It's happening in Europe
with Muslims.
Right. But yeah, the difference is in the United States it was fellow citizens, but they were black. And you had this racial divide, and they were not Irish. I guarantee you that. And when they moved into the Irish neighborhood where I lived as a child, everyone left. Everyone left. And they moved to the suburbs. The suburbs were new. They were a creation of after the post-World War II period. And at that point, you were no longer just Irish. With the Irish, you were with the Poles and the Italians and the Germans and all the other major ethnic groups, even in Catholic schools. So you, in a sense, lost your ethnic identity at that point. All of the things that happened in the United States are now happening in Europe. The weaponized migration and so on and so forth, it's happening now to destroy those cultures because it's a weapon. And so what they had to do in order to keep that ability, they had to turn the Hispanics into turn the Mexicans into gringos, or whatever you want to call it. Okay? And they did that through cultural warfare, a lot of the same stuff. The music, the subversion of Latino culture. One of the major agencies was the Protestant churches. They are always vehicles of social engineering. Especially when they come to the United States. A lot of Mexicans who are born Catholic become Protestant because they think that's the religion that will make you rich and powerful in the United States. That's what's going on now. I gave that speech in 1992. It's now 30 years later. And everything I said then is true. We've seen what has happened since that time.
I want to remark this idea of language of religion that you have said. In Spanish we say, hábleme en cristiano, speak to me in Christian. It's this idea of how language is also related with religion, and what you have told us about the idea of even if you are Catholic, if you speak English with all the cultural content that it has related with these Protestant roots, has an effect on Protestantization, right? So
That's right. The crucial. It's difficult to understand ethnicity in America, because people come from all different places, and then after a certain amount of time, they lose their native languages and so on and so forth. The best explanation of ethnicity in America is called the triple melting pot, which means that after 3 generations, you assimilate by becoming a Catholic, a Protestant, or a Jew. In other words, your religion in the United States becomes your ethnic identity. That is going to happen. That makes it much easier, in a sense, for Mexicans to assimilate, because they're Catholic and there's a big Catholic church here, and it's painless. It's relatively painless. compared to the situation in Europe or Germany, where I lived for a while. When you have Muslims coming in to Germany, it's not easy. It's not easy. And what happened is that the Turks, to a large extent, retained a kind of isolated identity within
the no-go zones, right?
the what?
The no-go zones, these places that are like,
Right, no-go zone. Yeah, I was in Berlin not too long ago, and there are certain areas where I don't know whether you don't go there, but you better speak Turkish if you want to go there and understand. Well, I was in Berlin. I was in Berlin in 1975 when there was still a wall there, and I was watching television, and they had to make an announcement. There was a rabid dog running around Berlin, and it was in Kreuzberg, and they had to make the announcement in Turkish because the people in Kreuzberg did not speak German.
Professor Jones, I have a question in the same line about this. How do you say, the social engineering that are doing to Mexicans, for example, to convert him in gringo? We have some Hispanic circles have a phrase that say the true rival of Hispanic America is Latin America. And I have this, for example, in a very practical way, when I complete a form, for example, to travel, there's some, for example, a form to put your ethnicity, and they have, for example, Latino, and I don't identify me as Latino, for example, in this MTV way that you have these Puerto Ricans or, no sé, this hot, sexy in the beach. No, for example, Chilean are not in that way.
No.
And
no,
my question is, what for example, the Americans feel the difference between an Hispanic and a Latino, and why this Hispanic is not very well known. For example, in the form is not Hispanic, for example. You can put other or put nothing. So, what are your thoughts in that?
If I have to fill out a form, I have to say I'm white. Well, am I white? I've been through this. First of all, historically, what happened after 500 years is basically the Protestant religions evaporated. They just disappeared. They are no longer the state religion in England, they are technically in England, but not in Scandinavia. And as a result, these people lost their identity because that was part of their identity, being a Lutheran in Norway, for example. Well, now they don't know what they are, and so they start saying, well, I guess I'm white. Well, white is a weapon of the oligarchs to basically destroy your identity. It's identity theft. And so it's the same. It's going to be the same thing with Hispanics or Latinos. They want to put them into some type of category that they will be able to manage. And they'll try and give you some benefits. They'll say you have benefits. But essentially, it's the same thing as being white. Am I white? I think I'm Irish and German, if you want to know where I came from. If you want my current ethnic identity right now, I'm Catholic. And white does not figure into this. I tried to explain this to some white boys at the San Francisco Memorial, and they got mad at me because they called me a race denier. But I'm saying white is a political category that gets imposed on people for political purposes. And that's social engineering. That's the essence of social engineering. And they're going to draw the people from South America into the same type of thing. You will be put in a box here so that they can manage you. And that's why they use terminology like this.
Edwin, I don't know if you want to continue with another question or...
No, just a comment, because I think here or in Chile, for example, this ethnicity don't have much sense. For example, one political problem that is we have indigenous peoples or a lot of subcultures, but the people of Chile in particular don't have this too much discrimination of that. Maybe are some kind of classism about economic status, but not about race, because all know that we are mixed. And
Right.
so we have a lot of problem with that, and I really feel that is more a political thing than a real stuff.
No,
It's
you're right. It is because first of all, the United States has an empire, and what they decide here gets projected onto the rest of the world. And what happened after this World War II, there was still this. They hadn't resolved this issue. The race issue was something significant, and they basically decided that race was the official category that they were going to impose on us. And the result was the civil rights movement, which you've heard about with Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King came from the South. They did have a regime of segregation, of separating the races in the South because it was important, because that's where most people lived. But that was not the case in northern cities like Chicago. That was a different situation. And so when Martin Luther King went to Chicago, he tries to agitate against a segregation that doesn't exist, which means he marches into neighborhoods which he considers white, but the people there, they think they're Lithuanian. They don't think they're white. They came from Lithuania. That's not white. You're not white in Lithuania. And what happened is basically they have tried to impose this racial dichotomy on the American people, obliterating all of the ethnic differences and just saying it's either black or white, because that's a form of control. And the main reason it's a form of control is you have conflict. You're constantly creating conflict between these two groups. This is the opposite of Catholic culture. This is the opposite of Mexico. The cosmic race was the marriage of the Hispanic and the indigenous population under the aegis, under the sponsorship of the Catholic Church, which brings about reconciliation. Now you have the exact opposite. You have an alien imposition of race on people. You prefer one group over the other. That leads to resentment. That leads to conflict. And that's the best way to rule people. Divide et impera was the rule of the empire, and race is the best way they achieve that in the United States.
even in Mexico, actors like Tenoch Huerta that have been in Hollywood have tried to establish this kind of Black Lives Matter agenda in Mexico. It doesn't have that impact, but the intention for doing that thing also happens, and is related with what Edwin says about all the mixed up races that we live along with it. So it's not such a problem. I want to say something else about this social engineering in Mexico, and this is a topic that we have talked about in some cases. There has been this Summer Institute of Linguistics that started in the 1940s to translate the Bible by Protestant translators, by Protestant linguists, to indigenous communities, so they can divide also the population and make is related with an anti-Catholic agenda that also happens in Mexico. This social engineering related with Protestantism and WASP also.
Right. If I can interrupt here, the Protestant churches in South America were always a vehicle of United States imperialism. They were sponsored by Nelson Rockefeller. One of the main reasons to convert people from South America to Protestantism is to get them to use contraceptives. That's why the Rockefeller family was interested in promoting Protestant sex in South America, to reduce the birth rate. That's always a form of cultural warfare, the population control, which the Rockefellers promoted throughout the world, but Nelson Rockefeller promoted especially in South America.
That started with black communities in the USA, right?
Also with black communities, Margaret Sanger was the creator of it's now called Planned Parenthood. It was called the Birth Control League at that point. And she, with Rockefeller money, she created the Negro Project. That's the name of it. They're embarrassed. Planned Parenthood's embarrassed to use those terms. They don't like to talk about it. But it was called the Negro Project, and basically the purpose was to get black people to use contraceptives. The two target groups in America were blacks and Catholics. They were not using contraceptives. The Protestants were. The Protestants started using contraceptives in the 1920s, and they immediately became worried about differential fertility, the fact that other people were having more children. What part of the research I did was go to the Rockefeller Institute, and one of their letters there that I read was a letter from a man who was on the board of the Population Council, which was run by John D. Rockefeller III. And he said, I don't agree with Planned Parenthood. I don't want our people going to Planned Parenthood. Why is it that the first people who line up at the birth control clinics are Protestants, our people, when they should be having more children? We want more children from our people. It's other people. But it backfired on them. It backfired on both the Jews and the Protestants because they were the ones who were most likely to make use of contraception. And as a result, they started to go out of existence. That's simply what happened. Demography is destiny.
Yes, and even most people ignore that even left wing have its eugenics story in this matter. But well, that's a topic that we can explore later.
This, by the way, this is one of the dumbest things you can ever hear out of the mouth of a Marxist, is he supports contraceptive. That is totally alien to everything that Karl Marx believed, but it shows you the Anglification of the left that has taken place, the sexualization of the left, the Anglification of the left, so that they're espousing things that are completely contradictory to classic Marxism, which believed that labor was the source of all value. The other side comes from Malthus, who said there's always too many people. He based it on Ireland, the situation in Ireland. But that's what I just wanted to add.
No, it's fine. And even in the USSR is related with this conflict between Stalin and the Bolsheviks, and he overcome and he destroyed all these birth control politics that Bolsheviks tried to implement in Russia, and Stalin eliminate all that politics because he understands this relation between politics and demographics. What do you consider all the topics that we have talking about? We maybe in later we will take them again, but I have certain questions that I want to make.
Go ahead.
What do you consider is relevant to attend using this logical, as logos, not logos, this logical perspective of Catholicism to different phenomena of daily life, like generally confined to triviality in a traditional perspective, such as publicity, architecture, literature, plastic arts, or cinema, and how it emerged the need of doing this kind of interpretation, because in general, there is this idea that only the left wing is focused on this kind of studies, and right wing is only busy in economics and technology and so on, right? So you try to understand pop culture, just for saying something, in a Catholic perspective, and I believe that is something interesting, and it's not that common. So I don't know what you want to talk about.
Well, I started off being a journalist, I mean, I started off being a professor, and then I'm suddenly a journalist. And I realized as a journalist, you write short pieces about something that is happening right now. That's why it comes from jour, today. You know what I mean? What's happening today? And I think that what you have to do if you're going to be a Catholic is you have to begin with something that is real. Because you can't relate to people unless you talk about something that's real. This goes all the way back. It's in my book, Dangers of Beauty, a fundamental change that took place in aesthetics in Italy during the Middle Ages, when Aquinas turned Plato upside down. In other words, Plato thought that art, you had to impose forms on matter, and matter had no meaning. So you had to impose the triangle on a piece of stone, and then a rectangle, and then a circle, and then you had a temple. And Aquinas comes along. Those people didn't know that there was such a thing as creation. We learned that from Genesis. Now, if there's creation, there's going to be logos in the world. Plato didn't know that. He didn't know there was a logos in matter. There's a logos in everything. And so Aquinas says, turn the whole thing upside down, and he says, existence calls forth essence. So because the world is created by God, because God is an artist, you can look at the world and the logos will emerge from it. And I think that's a fruitful way to begin any discussion. And I think any discussion with people who don't believe in you. Like I've had a long conversation with the people in Iran. I've been going back and forth to Iran for 10 years. How do you talk to people in a completely different culture who are all Muslims? What do you share with them? Well, that's part of what we learned from that discussion. But it's also part of the dynamic of Catholicism, especially if you're talking about the Jesuits in the 16th and 17th century. When I was in India, I was at the tomb of St. Francis Xavier. His incorrupt body is there. You can see his body, and there are Hindu women and there are Muslim women who come and pray to St. Francis Xavier. Okay? What did St. Francis, first of all, he didn't spend a lot of time. This is in Goa. He didn't spend a lot of time in India. He went to Japan, and what's he going to talk about to the Japanese? It's not the Guarani Indians. It's not the Abnaki. They're not savages. It's a high civilization. What are you going to talk about? What are you going to talk about? The logos of the sky. Let's talk about astronomy, because we all look at the stars, and if the Jesuits come up with a better calendar, well, then you've got their attention, and then you can go from there and say, well, there's a logos to human nature, and God is the author of God is logos. And so if you're approaching logos, you're approaching God. This was a fruitful way of introducing the discussion here, of creating a discussion. Matteo Ricci went to China, did the same thing. Another Jesuit went to China, wrote a classic, learned Chinese. That's not easy to do. I wrote a classic in Chinese literature and was ready to make an appearance before the emperor, and he died. And at that point, the battle in Rome over the Chinese rights took the wrong turn, and basically the people didn't, they said it's idol worship, and they sent some guy in to talk to the emperor who didn't know Chinese. Well, the emperor laughed at him, and he said, I'm not going to talk to this guy. He can't speak our language. If you can't speak the language of the people, why should they listen to you? And I'm saying there's more than one way. Obviously, we share a language, but there are things that we can simply look at as existence and begin the discussion there. That's why I think it's important.
Okay, I don't know if you want to also talk some about this part of cinema and architecture in general. Why also these topics that mainly are studied by left-wing thinkers.
I'd be happy to talk. I wrote a book on architecture. I wrote a book on music. I've written books on all of these topics because culture is important. And if you abandon culture, if you treat culture with contempt, your enemies will take it over and weaponize it. This is one of the fundamental transformations in Marxism that took place with Antonio Gramsci during the 1920s, where he said suddenly, maybe it's not so important to take over the means of production, economic production. Maybe culture is more important than the means of production. And what he did is he came up with a way of basically subverting a conservative culture, Italy, that then got transposed here to Notre Dame University, which is not far away. The father of our current Secretary of Transportation was a Gramscian. He started off life as a Jesuit. The Jesuits are completely rotten right now. They should be suppressed now because they're promoting homosexuality and the American empire and all these bad things. So he left the Jesuits, and then he became a disciple of Antonio Gramsci, and he took over Notre Dame. He took over Notre Dame, became had an endowed chair, never wrote a book. The only book he ever wrote was his doctoral dissertation, which was totally stupid. But he understood the mechanism whereby you could use culture, weaponize culture, to take over a conservative society, like Catholic societies, which are by nature conservative.
Yes, I really think that is very important because there is this idea that because culture is related with frivolity or something like that, traditionalists usually don't study it. They are in other topics more related with big politics, to say something, right? So on another topic that we as Hispanists talk a lot is the this idea of the phenomenon of the Protestantization of the church. How do you understand this phenomenon? Since you have also covered this topic, to what degree could one also think about the influence of Zionism and the revolutionary spirit of the Jews in Catholicism, despite the burden that this type of question contains under the vacuous and malicious signaling of the term anti-Semite. They have mentioned Julio Membier, Padre
Right.
Julio Membier also
Right.
was called anti-Semite. It remembers, just to finish the idea, this article of George Orwell related. It says, "What is fascism?" And he explains how this idea of fascism doesn't have any meaning, and it's just a way to degrade somebody, and a dominant argument, and you can't study the critic work or the ideas that this author have. I don't know, what do you believe about this Protestantization and about the relationship with Zionism and Jewish revolutionary spirit?
Okay, I think you're conflating two things. First of all, I don't think that Protestantization is an issue in the Catholic Church. I know there are people who like the Latin Mass and they think that the Novus Ordo Mass is a Protestant Mass. That doesn't. It's not a serious argument. Okay, and the reason it's not a serious argument is because Protestantism is dead. It's not a force anymore. It's certainly not a force in the United States of America anymore. When I was in the 1980s, you had big figures, public figures like Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson and all these televangelists who mobilized a large group of people. They're all dead, and they have no successors because Protestantism has evaporated. Now, on the other hand, what has happened in American culture is the Jews have replaced the Protestants as the ruling class. This happened in the 1970s, okay, which is 1978 is when John D. Rockefeller III and Nelson Rockefeller died. And that's a symbolic year because that was the death of the WASP ruling class in America. 1976, Woody Allen is on the cover of Time magazine as a great American filmmaker. Woody Allen is Jewish. He's not. He's Jewish American, if you want to talk that way. But to talk about him as an American is an exaggeration. What we're talking about here is the Jewish takeover of American culture. That is a serious issue. That is the most serious issue facing America right now. Israeli control over the American political system is the most crucial political issue in this country right now. And the proof that it's important is that no one is talking about it. All the politicians are afraid to talk about it. The only exception now was this Vivek, this India guy, Vivek Swamirami, who won the debate basically without Trump, because he's the only one who said that there should be some limit on the money that we give to Israel. Well, this is unheard of. This is precisely the problem. You've got people who are talking about the war in the Ukraine who can't use the proper vocabulary. They use the word neoconservative. Well, the people in Washington are not conservative. They're liberal. They're Democrats. You can't say that. What you're saying is when you use the word neoconservative now, it was a political movement in the 1980s. When you say it now, what you're telling us is that you're afraid to say the word Jew. Because people don't say that. You'll be punished if you say the word Jew in a way the Jews don't like. This is directly related to the Catholic Church. It's directly related to Vatican II. Specifically, I cover this book in the Jewish revolutionary spirit. The Jews tried to subvert the Second Vatican Council. The agent was a Jesuit by the name of Malachi Martin. They paid him money to subvert the church's teaching on the Jews. They wanted the church to say the Jews did not kill Christ. That's what they wanted. The 2,000 bishops are not going to agree to that because it's all over the gospel. St. Paul in 1 Thessalonians 2 said the Jews are the people who killed Christ and they are enemies of the entire human race. So they try to placate the Jews. They come out with this document called Nostra Aetate. And in Nostra Aetate, the Catholic Church says the church opposes all forms of anti-Semitism. What does that mean? They didn't define anti-Semitism. How can you make a statement like that and then not define it? Okay, anti-Semitism is a word that didn't exist until 1871. You had almost 2,000 years of the church dealing with the Jews, and they never used the word anti-Semitism because it's a racial word that has no meaning if you look at, let's say, the struggle in the gospel. That's two groups that share the same DNA fighting each other. The battle is not about DNA, it's about Logos. Do you accept Logos or do you reject Logos? Do you worship the Logos incarnate or do you kill him? This is the fundamental divide in human history. It's the struggle between the forces of Logos and the forces of anti-Logos. And the main force of anti-Logos in human history is the Jews. And if you can't say that, you're not you're not in the fight. You're not relevant. And we have to go back. First of all, the Catholic Church has gone down this path of Catholic-Jewish dialogue that has been a disaster for the Catholic Church.
Alfredo Jalife, Rame, that is a Mexican geopolitical analyst, mocks about this term anti-Semitism because he has an ethnic root. He's a Mexican Lebanese, so he say, why they call me anti-Semite? If I am Semite also, it's something that doesn't have any sense. But for this matter, I want to take this topic because there as far as I know, there will be available your next book, the Holocaust narrative.
Right.
You want to tell us about, but first of all, I want to establish some ideas. Some people think that if we talk about Zionism and all these things, like directly we are Nazis, no? And what I am trying to establish in here is that the necessity, as I am trying to understand, of Catholicism, of having its own criticism or to Zionism and to Judaism, not related with Nazism. And one thing, for example, how about these Jews like David Cole, this guy that made this documentary, David Cole in Auschwitz, or Norman Finkelstein that has this book, The Holocaust Industry? What's going on with them? How there are also Jews that are not related, or it's possible. I don't know. What do you think about this idea of revolutionary spirit? The importance of Catholic perspective to criticize the Zionist will to power and trying to separate the commonplace of Nazi and neo-Nazis, no, like anti-Zionism. There is something interesting in Nazi propaganda. There's a poster in the 1933 that has, let's say, Hitler's Kampf und Luthers Lehre, des deutschen Volkes gute Wehr, Hitler's battle and Luther's lesson are good defense for the German people. There are a lot of Nazis, even Catholic or something really strange mix up of Nazi Catholicism that doesn't know this relation between Nazism and Protestantism. So this is the idea of your new book, the Holocaust narrative, the question of the anti-Zionist narrative of the Nazis, and how about this anti-Zionists, these Jew anti-Zionists like David Cole and Norman Finkelstein?
Okay, so what I was trained in literature as a literary critic, and so I'm a kind of expert on explaining narratives. A narrative is basically a series of writings that establishes a story that becomes the explanation for how you interpret the universe, how you interpret everything. And what happened, so we have a calamity like World War II, And one of the first books to come out was a book by an Austrian priest by the name of Johann Lenz. And the book is called Christus in Dachau. Dachau was the paradigmatic concentration camp in the immediate period following World War II. It was the first concentration camp that was founded. It was founded in 1933. It existed the longest, and it was the paradigm. Okay? And this priest was there because it was Catholics who were sent to Dachau. There were over 2,000 priests sent to Dachau. And Father Lenz was one of them. And he said that what we had to learn there was the lesson that God was teaching us, that why are we being punished like this? Why are we being persecuted? And it was like a long meditation on suffering. And the priests basically were being subjected to all kinds of brutality. What the Nazis did, they emptied the prisons. They couldn't spare people for soldiers. They knew you couldn't trust these people. They emptied the prisons, put SS uniforms on them, and sent them to the camps where they tortured the priests because they hated God, they hated Catholicism, and they hated priests. And it got so bad that Lenz says by August of 1942, if this had gone on for one more month, we all would have died. But he said on August 15th, God, the Feast of the Assumption, God answered our prayer. And suddenly the word came down from Berlin that you can't treat these people anymore. They have to work, so you have to provide food. You can let food packages come in. And more importantly, you can allow these priests to have a chapel. Well, this is God's providence leading the concentration camp. God is saying your suffering has a purpose. I heard your prayer, and we will guide you out of this, but you have to suffer for the time being. Now, that is the original narrative. This book was the standard work. It was the Catholic interpretation of what happened in the concentration camps. And what happened is it got hijacked. The Jews hijacked that narrative. That book came out in 1955. Dachau is the paradigmatic camp. In 1958, Elie Wiesel's book, Night, came out. It was written by Francois Mauriac, a French Catholic, who translated his Yiddish memoir into good French. And at that point, the Jews who controlled the publishing industry hijacked the narrative and turned it into the exact opposite. So the message of Father Lenz is we are being punished for atheism, Gottlosigkeit. Now, Elie Wiesel captures the narrative. He says God died at Auschwitz. So now that's the creation of the narrative of atheism and Jewish suffering that they use to basically conquer Germany. Germany is still paying reparations for what happened there, but more importantly, they conquered the German Pope, Joseph Ratzinger, who then imposed, in a sense, the Holocaust narrative on the entire Catholic Church.
Okay.
Now, I can answer the Finkelstein thing. If you want to talk about Jews, let's just respond to that, and I'll talk about Finkelstein if you want.
No, I will ask only if we are fine with the time, Dr. Jones.
I can only go for an hour, so we're over an hour now. So I've enjoyed our conversation, but I have to get off. There's other things I have to do.
Okay, I really desire that this book get soon into your cultural awards promotion, and we will stay looking at it. Only I want to read something that you write to finish this encounter, and at the end, René will say something to finish this program in Spanish for all our friends. But this is a thing that I really like of your writings of Guadalajara when you were in Mexico, and this thing I believe is very important to say, and as a gesture of yours, and I really appreciate it. It says, If there were ever a country that was the opposite of Nazi Germany and the Ku Klux Klan, it is Mexico. Hitler promoted racial purity. Mexico is based on race mixing, as José Alberto Villasana pointed on it in his explanation of the image on the tilma. In his talk of the history of Mexico, Our Lady of Guadalupe appeared as a mestiza, conferring on the Mexican nation its status and the capital of race mixing. As I am leaving the hall during the break of bath to bask in the warm Mexican sun, a man takes me aside and tells me that Mexicans are the cosmic race. The term comes from Vasconcelos, and it refers to what the clan would refer to disparagingly as race mixing. In addition to being the capital of race mixing, Mexico is also a nation that could not possibly implement the separation of church and state because it is a country that was founded by the Blessed Mother. No one can understand the real and opposed to the Masonic Mexico without an understanding of the role which Our Lady of Guadalupe played in the creation of the Mexican nation. This I extended for all the Hispanic nations and Catholic nations also, and I'm grateful, and I believe all of us are grateful to have you in here. Please, thank you, Dr. Jones, to be with us tonight.
Thank you. You're welcome. My pleasure.
Mr. Eugene, thank you very much to come to Matices.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed our conversation.
Well,
muchas gracias.
I hope we'll see you later, I hope.
Comfortable.
Yes, thank you. I'd be happy to continue this discussion.
Okay. Bye, Mr. Eugene Michael Jones.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mientras despedimos a don Eugene Michael Jones, muchísimas gracias. Entendí que tenía un compromiso, así es que vamos a despedirlo en este rato. Muchas gracias, Mr. Jones. Bien. Bueno, yo creo que ha sido una experiencia especial. Antes de despedir el programa, nada más para nuestros auditores que en español quizás quedamos varios un poco colgados. No sé si es posible en pocos minutos que Edwin y tú, Daniel, que fuiste obviamente protagonista en esta entrevista, pudiéramos hacer como una suerte de repaso muy pequeño, sin perjuicio que, como lo pusimos en el chat, la idea es que la divina inteligencia artificial nos ayude en YouTube y genere automáticamente los subtítulos en español. De no ser así, vamos a ver cómo el equipo de bots que tenemos dentro de Matices nos ayudan a traducir y poner los subtítulos. Pero independientemente de eso, la gran mayoría yo creo que igual se entendió en algunos temas. Sin perjuicio de lo cual yo quiero destacar el esfuerzo del canal de hacer este tipo de aventuras, llamémoslo de esa manera. Así es que públicamente, Daniel, te doy las gracias por el soporte y creo que este programa habría sido prácticamente imposible de realizar sin tu ayuda y obviamente también con el acompañamiento de Edwin. Así que yo les quería pedir nada más que podamos hacer un resumen cortito, sí, claro. y cortamos, ¿les parece? Edwin, Daniel.
Sí, adelante, Edwin, lo que quieras comentar de tus impresiones, etcétera.
Sí, me pareció muy interesante, en particular un comentario que hizo ahí cuando Daniel le preguntó sobre la protestanización de la iglesia.
Sí.
Y claro,
prostitución. No es prostitución.
Sí, la protestantización de la iglesia, y él ¿cómo se llama? Como que invirtió el asunto, dado que para él los protestantes ya no existen como fuerza, sino que es más una cosa de los judíos.
Al menos en Estados Unidos, sí.
Claro, y claro, es como más que lo dice como los judíos, así que ahí que no sé cómo decirlo, y claro, y todas estas frases como que hay los neoconservadores y todo, son eufemismos para referirse a eso, y bueno, lo retrotrae a lo que es esta lucha de Dios y los que se le acusa el crimen de Jesús, pues al final del Hijo de Dios, en manos de ellos, y claro, el deicidio. Y claro que está operando a través de esto como desde el logos y los que están en contra del logos. Entonces, bien interesante ese punto que que coincide. Y también el logo, al final, a veces cuando uno habla como de creencia, yo creo que eso incluso es una contaminación anglosajona, porque en realidad la creencia católica no es creencia, en realidad es una
Claro,
verdad revelada. Y cuando
exacto.
una verdad revelada uno usa la razón ante
Correcto.
una verdad. No tiene que haber creencia aquí, eso es como
Claro,
no se trata de
no es como
creencia.
la creencia en la
No,
astrología, por decir,
claro, es como aquí tengo una
por decir
botella,
ejemplo.
no creo que haya una botella, está la botella, una verdad. Entonces, claro, esa es la forma de
Claro.
operar. Ahí uno ve qué tan reveladas están las verdades para cada uno, pero claro, la forma de operar es racional, a través de verdad. Entonces, justamente eso está el logo. Bueno, y lo otro como que me quedó en el tintero preguntarle sobre bien la literatura en general, porque la literatura es uno de los puntos fuertes de la hispano-catolicidad o del imperio hispánico, fue lo fuerte. Ahí tenemos a Cervantes como
Todavía
el
repercute.
máximo exponente, el siglo de oro, claro, es como lo que quedó así fuerte, todavía vigente, y claro, desde ahí la literatura ha sido una caída libre hasta Harry Potter y Hollywood y todo. Entonces, claro, eso también a veces
Se preguntó,
me faltó, aprovechando que era
se preguntó
Sí.
porque le dije que si había algún teólogo, algún filósofo, algún escritor hispano que en general a él le llamara la atención, y lo que él comentaba es que por su formación anglo-protestante, en realidad todo lo que vio fue fundamentalmente filosofía y literatura alemana, más la
Gringa.
que él estudió,
Claro.
más la que él estudió en Estados Unidos, la literatura norteamericana, por decirlo de algún modo. O sea, que realmente él desconoce mucho de toda esta literatura en el
Oye,
castellano.
Sí.
muchachos,
Mm.
yo quería hacerles un comentario a propósito de que esta semana estuvo, aprovechar de decirlo al aire, también estuvo en Copiapó y en Santiago, nuestro amigo Javier Vidal, que va a ver este video cuando llegue a la madre patria. Pero yo le hacía un comentario que tiene que ver con que acá en Copiapó hay un sector que se llama Santa Gemita y que al lado se ha utilizado así espontáneamente como cementerio de mascotas, ¿ya? Cementerio de mascotas. Y al mismo tiempo, por lo menos acá en Copiapó, entiendo que en Chile también, en otros lados, Concepción, quizás en México también, se está fomentando muchísimo el tema de la cremación, ¿vale? De la cremación en humanos. Entonces se da la distorsión, antilogos, a propósito de lo que conversábamos con Eugene, que se está dando sepultura de entierro a mascotas, pero a los seres humanos no les estamos dando cristiana sepultura. ¿Cuál es el punto? Que en algún momento no vamos a defender la patria porque no vamos a tener pater o padres enterrados en esas tierras que justifican la defensa. No sé si me expliqué bien. Entonces, esa distorsión que tiene
No,
que
y que
ver
tiene
con,
que ver con esto
no
que...
sé si lo podemos
No,
conectar,
de
pero lo
hecho está
necesitaba
relacionado,
decir.
René, de hecho está relacionado con lo que mencionaba Eugene sobre Eugenio Miguel,
Mm.
Eugene Michael, sobre las
Eugenio Miguel
esculturas,
Juan.
sobre, sobre las esculturas que han sido cortadas las manos, por ejemplo, en Chile, ¿no? Esta de que está un conquistador, no, en Buenos Aires, creo que digo, en
Sí, sí, sí.
Argentina. No sé si
Sí.
dijo en Buenos Aires, pero que está este misionero franciscano y
Mm.
este conquistador y les cortaron las manos. Es parte de eso, o sea, simbólicamente. Supongo que en ese tenor opera la desaparición del baquedano, por ejemplo, ¿no? Como esa ruptura con símbolos que tienen que ver con un arraigo, una nación y en el fondo una raíz, la madre patria, ¿no? La patria grande, por extensión, la madre patria, ¿no?
Así es.
Y no sé, bueno, para agregar, o sea, en general lo que tratamos con los compañeros que no pudieron seguirnos completamente, pues tratar de entender de E. Michael Jones como cómo él valora la hispanidad, la conquista. Él valora mucho la misión jesuítica, lo mencionó en el Paraguay, en México,
Habló
y
harto
esta
de
labor
masonería,
católica.
si mi traducción mental no me falló.
Sí, también la masonería, digamos, la expulsión de los jesuitas, urdida desde la masonería en sentido amplio. Me hubiera gustado,
Sí.
no había tiempo, de preguntarle esta idea de Franco que decía, bueno, la masonería en Estados Unidos, en
De
Inglaterra.
Hakim Bor.
De Hakim Bor, claro.
Hakim Bor.
Hakim
No es
Bor, por
Franco, es
supuesto.
Hakim Bor.
Ahorita de fondo mi gaucho, Marco.
Oye, Edwin, Hakim Bor es el seudónimo de Franco.
Claro,
Que Franco
por
eso no lo
supuesto,
escribía
sí,
como Franco,
claro,
sino que
claro,
ocupaba el
no.
seudónimo de Hakim Bor.
No, me equivoqué. De Hakim Bor cuando
Pero es
dice...
Franco, igual es Franco.
No, claro. La masonería inglesa es buena en
Es
Inglaterra.
buena, es muy buena, claro, por
El
supuesto, pero
problema es
para
que la
ellos.
masonería española sigue siendo buena para Inglaterra, ¿no? Entonces, yo creo que es una frase bastante lúcida, bastante intuitiva de este Franco, y bueno, yo no sé si habría algo más que comentar. Es un personaje que habría que traer otra vez a Matices, porque tiene muchas ideas muy
Muchos
interesantes.
matices y muchas cosas interesantes.
Sí, muchas cosas. De hecho, no alcanzó la mitad de lo que yo tenía como pensado, porque
Sí,
y
es
estuvo
que,
bien.
claro,
Estuvo bien.
ahora también comprender que es la primera oportunidad,
Sí.
igual el tema del idioma, aunque Daniel, ustedes vieron que se peina, Edwin también. Agradecer la conexión en vivo en el chat de la profe hispanista. Le damos un abrazo grande a la profe hispanista porque ha estado también en el canal y ella es una difusora tremenda de la hispano-catolicidad. ¿Quién mejor que ella, cierto? Y también a Patricio Lons, que estuvo acompañando de los, llamémoslos, bueno, los demás también, Gerardo, Mario, todos los que comentaron. Queremos agradecerles la participación y nuevamente dar las gracias a Edwin y principalmente a Daniel por este desafío que se cumplió.
No, yo te
Gracias,
agradezco.
profe.
Yo te agradezco también que ese como impulso que igual yo no había tomado, me hubiera obligado a hacer algo que para mí era un reto, y que para los hispanos quizás también sea un tabú, que sea tener una conferencia en inglés y todo esto, pero que al final tiene que ver con también...
Con nosotros, si en definitiva nos interesa a nosotros.
No, claro, y con esta parte de la catolicidad, que puede establecer un diálogo también con pensadores italianos, con pensadores polacos o irlandeses, etcétera. Digo,
Incluso
países
alemanes,
o alemanes,
claro, aunque
en
sean
cualquier país
bárbaros.
donde haya un católico.
Aunque
Pero
sean bárbaros, lo vamos a tolerar.
la idea es también, cuando hablamos de hispanocatolicidad, también permitirnos un diálogo con
Imperial.
personas que quizás su patria no es la hispánica, pero también comparten esa fe y ese vínculo y esa concepción antropológica de la catolicidad, ¿no?
Sin duda. Y bueno, destacar también que en algún rato, una vez procesada esta entrevista, quizás podamos masticarla con mayor agrado. Nuevamente,
Sí.
gracias. Destacar un tema así, compartirlo con nuestros amigos, que llegamos a Michael Jones gracias a don Daniel. Eso hay que decirlo. Ya, por lo menos en mi caso personal, no sé si Edwin ubicaba antes a Michael Jones, Eugene Michael Jones. Lo que sí comentó en vivo la profe hispanista que él es seguidora de Michael Jones de siempre, y bueno, y Lons que lo había conocido en Buenos Aires. Así es que esperamos que le haya gustado esta conexión. No desconozco si hay otras entrevistas en canales hispanos de
Bueno,
Michael Jones.
hay una página que se llama Michael Jones en español, tiene 7 videos para quien
Sí, pero
guste.
claro, le ponen una traducción.
Bueno, pero es algo, o sea, eso está
Sí,
bien.
sí, sí. A lo que voy yo es que
Y
la
las
pregunta es si
entrevistas
un
y
canal
las de...
como el nuestro,
No
en
hay.
español,
No hay,
haberlo
pero también
tenido en
están
video.
las entrevistas a su traductor en TLV1, también por si gustan,
Sí, 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 por
las
supuesto.
de Luis Álvarez Primo, nada más que es él el que expone, no es Michael Jones. Sí,
Claro.
también
Así es
si
que ahí
gustan.
nos anotamos una primicia.
Sí,
Nuevamente,
sí.
gracias. Un gusto de ver a
No,
Edwin
muy
y a
honrado
ti,
por
Daniel.
tener la confianza, René.
No, no, por favor. Es muy buen entrevistado en canales es muy entrevistado en canales de Estados Unidos, ¿cierto, Mario? Sí. Así es. Bien, pues, esto fue Matices, donde no todo es blanco-negro. Espero que les guste y que nos sigan apoyando. Seguiremos trabajando en esta línea. Un abrazo a todos, que estén muy bien y muy, muy buenas noches. Un abrazo, Daniel, Edwin. Chau, chau.
Chau, chau.